Sarah Martinez clutched the steering wheel of her old Honda Civic as another contraction ripped through her body. The rain hammered against the windshield, making it nearly impossible to see the narrow mountain road ahead. She had been driving for 3 hours, trying to reach the nearest hospital, but the storm seemed determined to trap her in these remote hills. The contractions were coming faster now, only minutes apart. Sarah pulled over to the side of the road, her hands shaking as she fumbled for her phone. No signal. Of course, there was no signal up here in the middle of nowhere. She had known this road was isolated, but it was supposed to be a shortcut to the city hospital where her doctor was waiting. Everything had started going wrong 12 hours earlier when her husband Jake had suddenly announced he was leaving for a business trip. Sarah had begged him to stay, explaining that she was having early contractions and felt something was different about this pregnancy. But Jake had brushed off her concerns, saying the baby wasn't due for another 2 weeks and that his job was more important than her paranoia. Her mother-in-law Helen had been visiting for the past week, supposedly to help when the baby arrived. But when Sarah's water broke that morning, Helen had simply shrugged and said she wasn't comfortable dealing with medical emergencies. She had packed her bags and left within an hour, claiming she needed to get back to her own life. Even Sarah's sister Emma, who had promised to be there for the birth, had canceled at the last minute. Emma had gotten a promotion at work and decided that flying to a business conference in New York was more important than being there for her sister's first child. The phone call had been brief and cold, with Emma saying that Sarah could handle it like millions of other women do. So Sarah had found herself completely alone when the contractions started getting serious. Her neighbor, Mrs. Bid Chen, an elderly widow, had offered to drive her to the hospital, but Sarah had politely declined. She didn't want to burden the old woman with what might be a long and complicated birth. Instead, Sarah had decided to drive herself, confident that she could make it to the hospital in time. Now, sitting on the side of a dark mountain road in the middle of a thunderstorm, Sarah realized how foolish that decision had been. Another contraction hit, stronger than before, and she doubled over in pain. When it passed, she tried starting the car again, but the engine just sputtered and died. The gas gauge showed empty, though she was sure she had filled the tank that morning. Sarah began to panic. She was at least 20 miles from the nearest town, with no phone signal and a car that wouldn't start. The contractions were getting more intense, and she could feel the baby moving lower. This wasn't supposed to happen for 2 weeks, but babies, as she was learning, don't always follow schedules. She tried to remember everything from her birthing classes, but her mind was clouded with fear and pain. She had always imagined giving birth in a clean hospital room with nurses and doctors nearby, with Jake holding her hand and her family waiting excitedly in the hallway. Instead, she was trapped alone in a broken-down car during one of the worst storms of the year. The rain was coming down so hard now that she could barely see 5 feet beyond her windshield. Every few minutes, lightning would illuminate the dark forest around her, casting eerie shadows that made her feel even more isolated. Sarah tried to stay calm, telling herself that someone would eventually drive by and help her, but as the hours passed, no other cars appeared on the remote road. Another contraction gripped her, lasting longer this time. Sarah realized with growing horror that she was probably going to have to deliver this baby by herself, in the front seat of her car, with no medical help whatsoever. She had read stories about emergency births, but she had never imagined she would be living one. She tried to make herself as comfortable as possible, pushing the driver's seat back as far as it would go. The contractions were now only a couple of minutes apart, and Sarah knew the baby was coming soon whether she was ready or not. She grabbed a small blanket from the back seat, one she had bought for the baby, and tried to prepare for what was about to happen. The storm seemed to be getting worse. Wind was now shaking the small car, and Sarah could hear branches breaking and falling around her. She wondered if her family would even know where to look for her when they finally realized she was missing. Jake wouldn't be back from his business trip for 3 days. Helen was probably already back home, probably not giving Sarah another thought. Emma was at her conference, likely networking and celebrating her promotion. Sarah felt a wave of anger wash over her, even stronger than the physical pain she was experiencing. How had she ended up so alone at the most important moment of her life? These were the people who were supposed to love and support her, yet they had all found excuses to be somewhere else when she needed them most. Another massive contraction hit, and Sarah knew there was no more time for anger or self-pity. The baby was coming, and she was going to have to handle this on her own. She tried to remember the breathing techniques from her classes, but the pain was overwhelming. She felt like she was drowning in it, with no lifeline to grab onto. The windows of the car were starting to fog up from her heavy breathing, and the temperature difference between inside and outside. Sarah wiped the windshield with her sleeve, hoping against hope that she might see headlights approaching. But the road remained empty, just her and the storm, and the baby who was determined to enter the world tonight. As she prepared for what might be the most difficult and frightening experience of her life, Sarah made a promise to herself and to her unborn child. If they both survived this night, she would never again depend on people who had shown they couldn't be counted on when it really mattered. She would build a new life, a stronger life, where she and her baby would be surrounded by people who actually cared about them. But first, she had to get through the next few hours alive. The next contraction was so powerful that Sarah screamed, her voice lost in the howling wind outside. She could feel the baby moving down, and she knew she was fully in labor now. There was no stopping what was happening, no matter how unprepared she felt. Sarah tried to position herself better in the cramped car seat, but every movement sent waves of pain through her body. The baby blanket she had brought was already soaked with sweat and rain that had somehow gotten inside the car. Her clothes were sticking to her skin, and she felt like she couldn't breathe properly in the humid, confined space. Hours seemed to pass, though Sarah had lost all sense of time. The contractions were constant now, one blending into the next with barely any relief in between. She had torn off her jacket and was using it to bite down on during the worst moments, trying to muffle her screams in case anyone might actually be nearby to hear. The storm was getting more violent. Sarah could hear trees creaking and crashing somewhere in the darkness around her. The wind was so strong that it was rocking her small car back and forth like a boat in rough seas. Several times she was sure the car was going to be blown off the road entirely, but somehow it stayed put. Sarah's phone battery had died hours ago, not that it mattered since there was no signal anyway. She felt completely cut off from the world, as if she and her baby were the only people left on Earth. The isolation was almost as terrifying as the physical ordeal she was going through. During a brief moment between contractions, Sarah managed to look at her watch. It was past midnight. She had been in labor for over 8 hours now, and she was exhausted beyond anything she had ever experienced. Every muscle in her body ached, and she was dizzy from the pain and lack of food. She hadn't eaten anything since breakfast, not anticipating that she would be trapped in a car all day. Another contraction hit. This, one different from the others. Sarah could feel the baby's head crowning, and she realized the moment of birth was finally here. Panic seized her as she realized she had no idea what to do next. The birthing classes had covered this, but everything seemed different when she was actually living through it alone in a dark car during a storm. She tried to remember what the instructor had said about emergency births. Keep the baby warm, clear the airway, cut the cord with something sterile. But Sarah had nothing sterile with her, no scissors, no towels, nothing that would help deliver a baby safely. She was going to have to improvise with whatever she could find in her car. The next push was involuntary, her body taking over completely. Sarah felt the baby's head emerge, slippery and warm, into her trembling hands. She was crying now, a mixture of pain, fear, and overwhelming emotion. Her baby was coming into the world in the worst possible circumstances, but the baby was coming alive. Another push, and the baby's shoulders appeared. Sarah was amazed by how small and fragile her child looked, yet strong enough to fight its way into existence despite everything going wrong. One more push, and suddenly the baby was completely out, slipping into Sarah's hands like a miracle covered in blood and fluid. The baby wasn't crying, and for a moment that seemed to last forever, Sarah was terrified that something was wrong. She gently cleared the baby's mouth with her finger the way she remembered from class, and suddenly a loud, angry wail filled the car. Sarah had never heard a more beautiful sound in her life. It was a girl. Sarah held her daughter against her chest, trying to keep her warm with the inadequate baby blanket. The baby's cries were strong and healthy, which was the only thing that mattered right now. Sarah was bleeding more than she thought was normal, but she tried not to panic. She needed to stay conscious and alert for her daughter's sake. The umbilical cord was still attached, and Sarah wasn't sure what to do about it. She remembered that it didn't need to be cut immediately, that it could wait until they reached medical help. But medical help seemed as far away as ever. The storm was still raging, and Sarah's car remained dead on the empty road. Sarah used her shirt to wrap the baby more securely, skin-to-skin contact helping to keep them both warm. Her daughter had stopped crying and was now making tiny cooing sounds that melted Sarah's heart despite their desperate situation. She had never felt love like this before, instant and fierce and protective. But Sarah was getting weaker, the blood loss was making her dizzy, and she was having trouble focusing. She knew she needed medical attention soon, not just for herself, but for the baby who would need proper care in her first hours of life. Sarah tried to stay awake, terrified that if she passed out, something might happen to her daughter. The rain was still pounding on the roof of the car, but Sarah thought she could hear something else mixed in with the storm sounds. At first, she dismissed it as her imagination, but then she heard it again. It sounded like an engine, still far away but getting closer. Sarah's heart jumped with hope, but she had been disappointed too many times already tonight. She strained to listen, holding her breath between the thunderclaps. Yes, there was definitely a vehicle approaching, its headlights beginning to pierce through the rain and darkness. But as the sound got closer, Sarah realized it wasn't just one vehicle. It sounded like multiple engines, moving fast despite the dangerous road conditions. She wondered who would be crazy enough to be driving these mountain roads in weather like this, especially in the middle of the night. The headlights were getting brighter now, and Sarah could see that it was actually a convoy of some kind. 3 or 4 large vehicles, moving in formation like they were on some kind of mission. Sarah tried to wave her arms to signal for help, but she was so weak that she could barely lift them above the dashboard. The first vehicle passed her car without stopping, its headlights briefly illuminating the inside of Sarah's Honda, and surely revealing her desperate situation. Sarah's heart sank as she watched the taillights disappear around a bend in the road. They hadn't seen her, or worse, they had seen her and chosen not to stop. But then Sarah heard the screech of brakes echoing through the storm. The convoy had stopped just around the bend, out of sight but close enough that she could still hear the engines idling. Car doors were slamming, and Sarah could hear voices shouting over the wind, though she couldn't make out what they were saying. Heavy footsteps were splashing through puddles, getting closer to her car. Sarah's vision was getting blurry from blood loss, but she managed to lean on the car horn, pressing it in short bursts to signal that she needed help. The sound seemed ridiculously weak compared to the storm, but it was all she could manage. The footsteps were running now, and suddenly there was a bright flashlight beam cutting through the rain and illuminating her car window. Sarah squinted against the sudden brightness, clutching her baby tighter to her chest. She could see the silhouette of a large figure approaching through the storm, but she couldn't tell who it was or what their intentions might be. A deep voice called out from behind the flashlight, barely audible over the howling wind. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but the tone sounded concerned rather than threatening. She tried to call back, to let them know she needed help, but her voice was too weak to carry over the storm. The figure reached her car and tried the door handle, but Sarah had locked the doors hours ago out of fear and habit. In her exhausted, pain-fogged state, she couldn't remember how to unlock them. She fumbled with the controls, her hands shaking so badly that she couldn't make them work properly. The person outside seemed to realize her predicament and started pounding on the window, not aggressively but urgently, as if they understood this was an emergency. Sarah could see other figures joining the first one, all of them moving with purpose and efficiency that suggested they were used to handling crisis situations. But Sarah's strength was fading fast. The adrenaline that had carried her through the birth was wearing off, and the blood loss was catching up with her. She felt herself starting to slip in and out of consciousness, even as help was finally arriving. Her last coherent thought before everything went dark was a prayer that whoever these people were, they would take care of her daughter if something happened to her. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had seen many difficult situations during her 12 years in the Army, but nothing had prepared her for what she found when her unit's convoy stopped on that storm-ravaged mountain road. She was leading a small team back to base after a training exercise when they had spotted the abandoned car with its hazard lights weakly blinking through the rain. Maria approached the Honda Civic with her tactical flashlight, immediately recognizing the signs of someone in serious distress. Through the fogged windows, she could see a young woman slumped over the steering wheel, holding what appeared to be a newborn baby. The woman was barely conscious, and Maria could see blood on the car seats even through the rain-streaked glass. "Johnson, get the medical kit," Maria shouted to one of her team members. "Rodriguez, radio ahead to base and get a medevac helicopter in the air now." She turned back to the car and pounded on the window, trying to get the woman's attention, but there was no response. The car doors were locked, and the woman inside seemed too weak to open them. Maria made a quick decision that went against her usual methodical approach to problems. Sometimes, when lives were on the line, you had to act fast and worry about the consequences later. "Stand back," Maria called to her team. She grabbed a tactical baton from her gear and, with precise force, struck the passenger side window. The safety glass shattered into tiny cubes, allowing Maria to reach inside and unlock the door. Cold rain immediately started pouring into the car, but that was the least of their concerns now. Maria squeezed through the passenger door and quickly assessed the situation. The woman was in shock from blood loss, and the baby in her arms was crying weakly. The umbilical cord was still attached, and it was clear that this birth had happened very recently, with no medical assistance. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Maria said, gently touching the woman's shoulder. "I'm Staff Sergeant Santos, U.S. Army. We're here to help you and your baby." The woman's eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus. "My baby?" she whispered. "Is my baby okay?" Your baby is beautiful and she's breathing well, Maria said, checking the infant's color and responsiveness. But we need to get both of you to a hospital right away. Can you tell me your name? Sarah, the woman managed. Sarah Martinez. I was trying to get to the hospital, but my car broke down in the storm. Her voice trailed off as another wave of weakness hit her. Maria had delivered babies before during her deployments overseas, often in much worse conditions than this. She knew Sarah was experiencing dangerous blood loss and needed immediate medical intervention, but she also knew that panicking wouldn't help anyone, especially not the tiny life that had just entered the world under these terrible circumstances. Sarah, listen to me, Maria said firmly. You did an incredible job bringing this baby into the world all by yourself. That took more courage than most people will ever need in their entire lives. Now I need you to stay with me so we can get you both somewhere safe. Johnson arrived with the medical kit, and Maria quickly began working to stabilize Sarah. She clamped and cut the umbilical cord with sterile equipment, then started an IV to replace some of the fluids Sarah had lost. Rodriguez came running back from the convoy's communication vehicle. Sergeant, the storm has all the helicopters grounded, Rodriguez reported. Nearest hospital is 40 miles, but the main road is washed out. We'll have to go the long way around, probably 2 hours in this weather. Maria cursed under her breath. 2 hours was too long for someone losing this much blood, especially with a newborn who needed specialized care. But giving up wasn't in her vocabulary, and she had never left anyone behind in her military career. She wasn't about to start now. Change of plans, Maria announced to her team. We're taking them with us in the convoy. Johnson, get the heating system running in the medical transport vehicle. Rodriguez, radio ahead and tell the hospital to prep for emergency surgery and have a neonatal team standing by. Thompson, help me get them moved. The team worked together with the precision that came from years of military training. They carefully transferred Sarah and her baby to the larger military vehicle, which was equipped with better medical supplies and climate control. Maria rode with them, monitoring both patients while her team navigated the dangerous mountain roads at speeds that would have been reckless under normal circumstances. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness during the ride, but every time she woke up, she found Maria's calm, confident face looking down at her. The baby remained stable, wrapped in military-issue blankets and responding well to the warmer environment. Why were you driving alone in this storm? Maria asked during one of Sarah's lucid moments, partly to keep her talking and partly because she was genuinely curious about how someone had ended up in such a desperate situation. Sarah's face crumpled with a mixture of pain and anger. My husband said his business trip was more important than staying for the birth. My mother-in-law didn't want to deal with a medical emergency. My sister chose a work conference over being here for me. Tears mixed with rain on her cheeks. Everyone I thought I could count on found reasons to be somewhere else. Maria felt a surge of anger toward these people who had abandoned Sarah in her time of greatest need. In the military, you never left your fellow soldiers behind, no matter what. The idea of leaving a pregnant woman to face childbirth alone was incomprehensible to her. Well, they missed out on meeting a real fighter, Maria said. What you did tonight, delivering your baby by yourself in those conditions, that's warrior-level courage. Not everyone has that kind of strength inside them. The convoy finally reached the hospital as dawn was breaking through the storm clouds. The medical team was waiting at the emergency entrance with gurneys and equipment. Sarah was rushed into surgery while the baby was taken to the neonatal intensive care unit for evaluation. Maria waited in the hospital lobby, still wearing her rain-soaked military fatigues. She had called her commanding officer to explain the situation and had been told to take whatever time was needed to ensure the civilians were properly cared for. Her team had been dismissed to return to base, but Maria couldn't bring herself to leave until she knew both Sarah and the baby were going to be okay. Hours later, a doctor came out to update her. Sarah had needed a blood transfusion and surgery to repair some tearing, but she was going to make a full recovery. The baby girl was healthy and strong, with no complications from her dramatic entrance into the world. She wants to see you, the doctor said. She's been asking for the soldier who saved her life. Maria found Sarah in a private room, looking pale but alert, with her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms. When Sarah saw Maria, tears started flowing down her cheeks. I don't know how to thank you, Sarah said. You saved both our lives tonight. If you hadn't found us, you would have figured something out, Maria replied. You're tougher than you think, but I'm glad we were there to help. Sarah looked down at her daughter, then back at Maria. I've been thinking about what you said, about being a fighter. My whole life I've been depending on other people who let me down when it really mattered. But last night, I learned that I'm stronger than I ever knew. This little girl and I, we're going to build a better life together. Maria smiled. What are you going to name her? I was going to name her Emma, after my sister, Sarah said. But I think I'm going to name her Maria instead, after the warrior who smashed down the door to save our lives." Maria felt her throat tighten with emotion. In all her years of military service, she had never received a higher honor than having a child named after her. "I'd be proud to share my name with such a brave little girl," she said. Before leaving the hospital, Maria made sure Sarah had her personal phone number and had connected her with resources for single mothers and survivors of abandonment trauma. She also made some phone calls to ensure that Sarah's absent family members learned exactly what they had missed and how their selfishness had nearly cost 2 lives. Maria's unit was transferred to a new assignment 2 weeks later, but she stayed in touch with Sarah and baby Maria. She watched from afar as Sarah built a new life filled with people who actually showed up when it mattered. Sarah went back to school, became a nurse, and eventually founded a support organization for mothers who had been abandoned during pregnancy and childbirth. Years later, when little Maria was old enough to understand, Sarah would tell her the story of the stormy night when a warrior in uniform appeared like an angel to save their lives. She would teach her daughter that real strength comes not from the people who promise to be there, but from discovering your own courage when everyone else lets you down. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, a true warrior will crash through the darkness just when you need them most, reminding you that there are still people in the world who understand that some things are more important than convenience, comfort, or personal ambition. Some people understand that when someone is fighting for their life, you drop everything and fight beside them. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos was that kind of person, and Sarah Martinez had been blessed to cross paths with her on the most important night of both their lives.